Hey everyone, in this video we're going to go over the definition strategy. So this one's kind of important because it is our second essay. So if you guys remember from the narration lecture video, I mentioned how each of these 9 strategies, we can use them as mini tools in our greater essay to develop ideas, but the strategies themselves could also be a type of essay where we use mainly that strategy and that's how we organize our essays. So for the second essay, you're mainly using the definition strategy and it's going to be structured like a definition essay, but of course, you will be using other strategies in it. So for example, in the definition essay, most likely you'll be using example, strategy, description, comparison, contrast, and narration. So I think this one's going to be maybe a little bit of a long one. So if you want to press pause now and maybe get a drink, get a snack, right, I would do that. So let's see how long this one goes. But anyway, with the definition strategy, we, as writers, we go beyond a dictionary explanation to create a more thoughtful, extended definition. So we'll look at how the many different ways we can define something. So why define? Why even do it? So let's take a look at something like a meme, right? Do you know what a meme is? Would you be able to give a definition of it? I think for most people, they kind of have a general understanding of what a meme does or what it is, but I don't think most people have a really fleshed out, concrete understanding of what exactly a meme is. So here we have a very popular meme of Boromir from Lord of the Rings. And here we have the actual definition of a meme. So a meme is a noun, an element of a culture, system of behavior passed from one individual to another by imitation or other non-genetic means. So it could be an image, a GIF, a video, text. And typically, as it's spread among users, users tend to make changes to it, slight changes. So that would be the accurate definition of a meme. So why do we define what is our purpose? Based on that example, in the case with the meme, it's to clarify the meaning of a certain subject or term, right? Or to clarify the meaning of what a meme actually is. Sometimes our purpose is to gain a greater or more nuanced understanding of that subject. Sometimes we define something because maybe there's a lot of negative associations or stereotypes with that subject, so that's why we define it. Sometimes we want to challenge a current definition. Maybe we don't think it's accurate enough, or maybe we just want to expand a definition. Maybe there's more to it than meets the eye. So, with this essay, your purpose might be different from your other classmates, right? Maybe you are defining a subject because you want to overcome some negative associations with that term, but someone else might choose another term to define and their purpose is different. Maybe they just want to expand that definition because they think a lot of people misunderstand what that subject or term means. So, whatever term you choose to define in your invention worksheet for this essay, you're going to need a purpose. So, one of these bullet points will be your purpose, right? So, ask yourself, why did I choose to define this particular term or subject? And with everything we write, we always think about audience, right? Who are we writing for? So think about who might want to know more about that term you're defining, or think about whether or not people would actually be reluctant to know more about it, right? Because these things come into play. And think about how readers are already defining that term, right? So let's take, for example, let's say you are defining the subject of what it means to be a bodybuilder in your essay, right? Who do you think we would be writing for? It can't be other bodybuilders because they already know what it means to be a bodybuilder. So maybe it could be for people who know nothing about them, or maybe they have some kind of preconceived notions about them or assumptions about them. And so then this essay would be for people like that, right? What about for college student? It can't be for other college students because college students already know what it means to be a college student. So it could be for maybe high school students who are questioning whether or not they want to go to college, right? Or even older people who haven't been to college yet but are thinking about going in. So a definition essay defining what it means to be a college student would be great for those people. A good definition starts by placing your term or subject into a general category and then figuring out what is that defining or distinguishing feature or characteristic that separates that thing from other things in the same category. So we take the term bodybuilder, and the dictionary definition of a bodybuilder is a athlete who works for muscle definition. So the category or class that the bodybuilder belongs to is an athlete. And here we're already using the classification strategy. If you remember from the using the strategies reading and activity, classification is when you take something and you break it down into different types or categories, or you put something into a category. So here, a bodybuilder is part of the athlete category, but what makes a bodybuilder different from other athletes is that they work strictly for muscle definition. So in other words, the basic traditional general definition has two parts. One, the general category class that the subject belongs to, and then two, a specific characteristic that distinguishes them from other terms in that class. So here we have a visual representation of breaking down a general definition. So we have a column of terms being defined, the category they belong to, and then what sets them apart from other things in that same category. So we have writer. The writer belongs to a general class of people who use words. What makes them different from other people who use words? They require peace and quiet. Muscle belongs to a category of body tissue. What makes it different from other body tissue is that it's fibrous and it's capable of contracting. We have an osprey, belongs to a category of hawks. What makes them different from other hawks? They are mainly fish eating. So let's say for another example, we have a term being defined, Welsh Corgi. General class it belongs to is dog. What makes them different from other dogs? They're small yet athletic and lively herders. Or let's say we're defining fitness influencer. The general class they belong to is social media personality, but what makes a fitness influencer different from other social media personalities? You could say that these social media personalities are more focused on fitness related content, right? Workouts, meal planning, meal prepping, right? They're more into the fitness and dietary choices that people make in their life, right? Or you could even say what makes them different is they always have a gym bag with creatine and pre-workout in it. They might own 10 plus workout outfits, right? College student, what general class or category does a college student belong to? If you said student, you're correct. But what makes them different from other students? So let's think about this. The obvious is that they're there to get a degree, right? Some kind of degree or a certificate. They're there for higher education. But what else makes them different from, let's say, a high school, middle school, or elementary student? They're definitely adults. They're also not always the same age. We have people of different ages, right, in a college classroom. They also made the choice to be there, right? With high school, middle school, elementary school, you kind of have no choice but to go to class. But a college student makes the conscious choice and effort to show up, to be there, right? Even though they didn't have to, right? So, and most college students have a job or family, so they're juggling other responsibilities. So those are some of the distinguishing characteristics that makes a college student different from other types of students. So now that we know how to craft a general definition or a traditional definition, how do we develop that into a full-blown paper, right? We got to extend that definition. So we look at a lot of other things beyond that dictionary definition. We show what else that term is, what it's not, what else makes it unique or different. We look at any synonyms or associations. We look at the origin of the word or etymology, right? So, for example, everyone's name has an etymology, I'm hoping. Some names are very unique, so there's no known etymology because maybe it was just created by your parents. But my name, for example, Christina, Latin origin, means follower of Christ. That's the etymology. You can include connotations. a personal definition, an expert's definition, and a cultural or social definition. So we'll break down each one of these. So the first way to develop an extended definition is to tell what else it is. So look at other characteristics or features that are essential or unique to that subject that differentiate it or distinguish it from other things in that same category. So engineer, the traditional dictionary definition is a person whose job is to design or build machines, engines, or electrical equipment, or things such as roads, railways, or bridges using scientific principles. So let's go beyond that a little bit more. What other characteristics do they have? So, for example, engineers, they're fascinated with the physical world. They'll usually value utility over beauty or knowledge. They have a thorough understanding of mathematics and science, and they're trained to apply that knowledge to physical objects and systems. So, here now we're building on to that dictionary definition by telling what else engineers are. So we already defined what a bodybuilder was, right, using the dictionary definition, right? An athlete who works for muscle definition. But now let's tell what else it is. What else do they do? Well, they focus on aesthetics. They prioritize muscle size, symmetry, and definition over performance or endurance. They always train with specific muscle groups in mind. They use high volume resistance training, and they might even have split routines to promote hypertrophy. They also have a strong mindset because they need that high discipline and consistency in their training and their diet. And you can do the same for college students, right? So here you could kind of think about it. College students are what? What do they value? What do they focus on? What do they have? Right? So building that definition, telling what else they are. They're not just learners, but maybe they're workers. They're also caregivers. Or maybe they're also first generation, right? College students, maybe they value sleep. They value caffeine, right? But maybe they also value community in the classroom. College students focus on bettering their lives, right? College students have blank, right? You could do so much and develop this definition beyond that dictionary. You can also tell what else a subject is by looking at other related things. So for example, with a bodybuilder, we can look at what is their motivation to do this? What are their body composition goals? What does their diet look like? What does what does posing look like? How do they present themselves on stage? We can also look at these related aspects of being a college student. We can look at their diet, right? What kind of academic goals do they have? Right? What study habits do they have? Financial struggles. How do their goals shape their identity? So there's lots of things we can look at when it comes to telling what else a subject is. The second way to develop an extended definition is by telling what it is not. This is really a powerful way to define a term, especially if that term is often misused, misunderstood, right? Or there's a lot of misconceptions regarding that term or even stereotypes. So engineers, although they have a thorough understanding of certain scientific principles, they're not pure scientists. They generate knowledge, but it's that knowledge is not an end in itself, where it is for like a mathematician or a physicist. They might produce these beautiful structures like bridges, towers, but they're not artists in the way that architects are. They follow a lot of rules, but they're not primarily interested in rules like lawyers are. And there's money involved, but they're not accountants, and many people involved, but they're not managers. They do have to write reports that are both clear and accurate, but they're not primarily writers either. Also, bodybuilders, they're not just athletes. While they do train intensely, their goal is not always peak performance in a sport, it's more about sculpting the body. They're not just merely fitness influencers, though most of them have a very strong online presence. Their focus goes beyond likes and followers. Usually it's towards long term measurable goals, right? Physical goals. They're not nutritionists, but they know a lot about macros and nutrition, probably than the average person. They're not models, but they care deeply about their appearance, right? Their aesthetics, they're built, they're not born. And they're not simply gym rats obsessed with the gym. They're students of discipline and structure. And we can go on, right? Here's another example. I've had a student define the term barista, and they talked about how a barista may listen to your problems, and be there for you to make you a great cup of coffee, right? And you might see them every day, but they're not your therapist, right? They might make pastries and other edible items, but they're not chefs, right? So building this definition by telling what that subject is. The third way to develop an extended definition is by including additional distinguishing characteristics. So, what other characteristics or qualities, it could be interesting, funny, unique, controversial qualities or traits that separates that subject from other things in its same class? It could be like an unexpected characteristic that really sets that subject apart. So here we have a really great example from the textbook, defining the term farmer and some unique or unexpected characteristics that makes them different, right? So farmer, he's a born optimist, right? They have to plant crops with no assurance that nature is going to cooperate and the crops will grow. So they have to be an optimist. A farmer is devoted to the soil, right? They might enjoy letting it sift through their fingers. They might enjoy the smell, the aroma of a field. A farmer's self-denying because his or her barn is often better planned, sometimes more modern than even their house. And a farmer is independent, right? It's very hard to organize farmers into unions. So let's think about bodybuilders. What unique or unexpected or interesting characteristics separates them from other subjects in the same category, which is athletes? So you could even say that a bodybuilder is someone who brings their own food container, that a meal they've already prepped, to a birthday party, because they have to stay so consistent with their diet that they're going to eat what they cooked rather than eating the food at the party. Or maybe they're always carrying food around, right? Even to the gym. I've seen a lot of bodybuilders that have their own meal prep food at the gym and they're eating it at the gym. Bodybuilders are self-sacrificing, right? It takes a lot of focus and consistency and discipline to have your training right, your nutrition right, your sleep right, right? So they're self-sacrificing in that sense. And you can take any subject and really think about what makes them unique or what is an unexpected trait. So let's say, for example, we're defining the term teacher, right? So what makes them so unique, or what additional distinguishing characteristics do they have? Well, teachers are people who, even outside of the classroom, after the bell has rung, they're constantly thinking about their students. They're thinking about how to better their lesson plans. They're thinking about how to better curriculum, right? So, for example, even when I'm on break or Christmas break or summer break, I'm constantly revising my slides, my lesson plans, right? My worksheets, things like that. Or you could take another term, such, let's say, for example, ADHD. Let's say we want to define this term ADHD because maybe many people misunderstand it, right? What unique traits make them different? Well, I could say ADHD is like having a superpower, because even though we walk into a room and we are like, well, I just forgot what I needed to get, or maybe we have a million things running in our mind constantly, we have the ability to hyper focus, right? Once we start something and we get into it, we could go hours without eating, without a bathroom break, and just hyper focus on a task, right? Usually we're very detailed, right? So you could take any subject and term and really think about it and think, wow, what makes them, what distinguishing characteristics do they have that differentiates them from other things in its same class? So how do we start adding other strategies into this? So for example, if we want to talk about what additional distinguishing characteristics a subject has, we could use a strategy of process analysis. So if you remember, process analysis is looking at how to do things or how things are created. So maybe we look at the process of how to become a bodybuilder. How is a bodybuilder made? What steps can people take to become a bodybuilder? Is it a special or difficult process? What about that process makes the bodybuilder different from the process of becoming, let's say, a basketball player, right? And that process is going to look different. So that's something that you can talk about. You can use the strategy of description. Describe a bodybuilder's physique and how it's different from like the physique of a soccer player, right? And it's going to look different. Or example, provide real world examples of bodybuilders, right, that have these characteristics. And even within that, you can use classification. With bodybuilders, you actually have different kinds, different categories of bodybuilders. You might have those that are very science based. You might have those that are old school and what they really do is they just show up to the gym and they train hard. The fourth way to develop an extended definition is you can look at the synonyms or the associations. So think about what other terms are synonymous with your chosen subject, right? So bodybuilders, words that are synonymous with bodybuilders, weightlifter, strength trainer, gym rat, iron addict. Or you can use words associated with that subject. So basically, things that people think about when they hear that word. So for bodybuilders, right, many people associate cutting and bulking with them, meal prep, split routine, hypertrophy training, body fat percentage. And here is where you can use strategies like comparison and contrast. So compare your term or subject to something that's familiar to your reader by using synonyms related to that term. So a bodybuilder often is compared to a weightlifter because they lift heavy objects, but a weightlifter focuses on strength and performance, and a bodybuilder's goal is more aesthetic. The fifth way to develop an extended definition is using the etymology. So, what's the term's origin or what's the history behind the term? So, bodybuilder, that term was first coined by R.J. Roberts. He was superintendent of the Boston YMCA. Okay, and it was used first to describe someone who trained for physical strength and fitness. And comparison and contrast is a great strategy to use when you're talking about the etymology because you can look at how the term was used historically and you look at how it's used now. So, in the past, with bodybuilders, the emphasis was on health and physical development, but in contrast, today, the term bodybuilder refers to someone who trains with a specific goal in mind, and that's usually aesthetics, right? So, muscle definition, size, symmetry, and usually it's for competition or sometimes just for personal transformation. But the modern term is now more focused on emphasizing visual results. The sixth way to develop an extended definition is by including the connotations. So, what are connotations? Connotations are the idea or feeling that comes to you when you hear that specific word. So, what feelings or emotions does that term evoke when someone hears it? Right? And sometimes it's a positive connotation. So, for example, we hear the word Christmas. For most people, it's a very positive connotation. And in their mind, they'll see an image of them being at a family party, everyone's gathered, there's a tree, gifts are being given, children running around, Christmas music playing, eggnog, right? But we hear other words like manufacture, and that has more of a negative connotation because when we hear that word, we see factories, smoke, pollution, things that are mass produced, right? Not specially made, right? And some words have a neutral connotation, right? Or it could have some other idea or general feeling. So, bodybuilders, we can look at it from both sides. When some people hear the term bodybuilder, it has a very positive connotation. They think about people who have high physical fitness and discipline, right? For some people, it has a negative connotation. They think of someone who is overly obsessed with how they look, their aesthetics, and body image. The seventh way to develop an extended definition is to now include your personal definition, right? And here you can include like strategies like narration or example, right? So give your explanation of how you understand that subject or term, right? Based on your personal experience. You can also use an expert's definition. So, what do experts in this subject area to say about your term? How do they define it, right? So, let's go back to bodybuilder. I'm going to take the definition that the IFBB states, right? Because they are the foremost federation and experts on bodybuilding. So, according to bodybuilding specialists from the International Federation of Bodybuilding and Fitness, bodybuilders are athletes who compete in the aesthetic sport of bodybuilding, focusing on symmetry, muscularity, size, and presentation of their bodies. Lastly, you can develop the extended definition by including a social or cultural definition. So, how is the term currently used in our culture, maybe in popular culture, like films, movies, TV shows? Or how does the use of that term reflect our values as society, right? How is that term represented in our media? So, for example, let's say you want to define the term nerd, and maybe your purpose is to kind of negate or overcome the stereotypes associated with nerds. So, think about how nerds are portrayed in popular media. So, in movies or TV shows, like Big Bang Theory, for example, right? Is a nerd in Big Bang Theory, how are they portrayed? In a bad way, in a negative light, in a positive way, right? Or in our society, when people hear the term gamer, for example, let's say we're going to define gamer. How do people represent it in our media? Do they talk about gamers as people in their mother's basement with no job, doing nothing, right? And maybe so your purpose in defining gamer would be to, right, challenge these stereotypes. So here I have an example. I tried to fit it all into one paragraph, but of course, yours would not look like this because you will have the whole essay to develop that definition. But here, I'm basically trying to define the word immigrant. So I provide a general definition, etymology, cultural social definition, some synonyms, connotations, associations, and distinguishing characteristics. Okay, we're in the home stretch here. Now we're just going to talk about how you will organize your essay. So, with a definition essay, your essay may not be organized or structured the same way as someone else because your purpose was different. So, in the invention worksheet, around the last step, I ask you, what is your purpose for defining this term, right? So, if you go back to the slides where I talked about purpose, choose one of those bullet points, right? Are you just trying to clarify a term? Or do you think this term has been misunderstood, so you're trying to redefine it? Or maybe this term has so many negative associations or stereotypes regarding it that you want to challenge that, right? So depending on your purpose, that's how you will organize it. I did put it, I put two templates up on Moodle, but you can essentially reorganize all those points in that body to fit the purpose, right? So whatever your purpose is, it's not up to me to decide the purpose. It's going to be up to you, and depending on the term that you choose to define. So let's say you choose a term and your purpose for defining it is maybe you want to give a more nuanced definition or more clarification. So this is how you would kind of organize it, right? And on the left side, I put reasons as to why you would put those points first, and then some possible strategies you can use for each of those major sections in your body. Or let's say you want to define a term like empathetic, right? And your purpose is you want to give a more nuanced definition of it. Another way you can organize it is like this. First, talk about how, just general acquaintances would define you, right? In terms of being empathetic. How do friends define you in terms of being empathetic? How do those closest to you, like family, define you in terms of being empathetic? And then lastly, how do you define it for yourself? What does being empathetic mean to you? Or let's say you're trying to define a label or a stereotype, right? Like a term like gamer, let's just say. And you want to show how that label is false or incorrect. You could organize your paper like this, right? You would definitely want to end towards the end of the body. You definitely would want to start confronting those stereotypes or misconceptions, right? So you would talk about what it's not, additional distinguishing characteristics, and end with how you would define it. So, as we move on to the second essay, the invention worksheet is really important because that's where you're going to start gathering all that information. But keep in mind, the invention worksheet again is just like a brain dump for you, right? I'm not looking for perfection. You're not doing a draft there. You're not even doing an outline yet. It's just for you to gather a bunch of information. So all the things I went over, what is a general definition? What are synonyms? What is your definition? What are some misconceptions? What is a not? What is the etymology? Those are all in the invention worksheet, so you can gather all that information and start thinking more deeply about the term. And all those ways to develop the extended definition, they should be in your essay. So this essay is really going to provoke you to think outside of the box and really critically think about how a term is being used, how other people understand it, right? So you can theoretically define any term, right? So I had some example terms you could define in the information and guidelines, but here are some examples of really excellent essays I've seen, right? I've seen people define what it means to be the black sheep of a family, what it means to be the oldest son in a Filipino family, what it means to be the youngest daughter, what it means to be the oldest daughter, right? What it means to be a mother, what it means to be a veteran, what it means to be a mother and a soldier, right? So there's many different subjects or terms you can define, right? Or what it means to be first generation college student, what it means to be second generation immigrant. You could do literally anything. What it means to be introverted, empathetic. It's really going to be up to you.